Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 6 of the Wildcard Draw. I'm Matty Egan. Today we reflect on one of the darkest days in modern history, September 11, 2001. This year marks 24 years since the tragedy that changed the world forever. This episode is presented in a podcast documentary style to inform and reflect on the events of that day, and most importantly, to pay tribute to the thousands of victims and families that were affected. Like so many others, I remember exactly where I was when it happened. I was in Melbourne, Australia, late at night playing video games with my cousin. My mum came into my bedroom and told us to turn the game off and put the news on. At that point, we thought a small plane had accidentally flown into the World Trade Center. My cousin and I even thought that maybe the pilot had a heart attack or it was some type of strange accident. But then, live on TV, we saw the second plane hit the South Tower. We were in absolute disbelief. We stayed glued to the news for the next 8 hours straight. None of us went to work or school the next day, and at that time we truly had no idea what we were witnessing or how unbelievable it all was. I want to be clear that I'm not here to speculate or promote conspiracy theories. I live in another country far removed from government agencies or insider knowledge. All I can do is reflect on the information that was reported to the public at the time. And the one thing we do know for a fact is that people died, and it is in their memory that this episode is told. It was a Tuesday morning on September 11, 2001. The early 2000s felt like the world's golden age. Booming economy, New York City riding high as one of the world's most magnetic capitals. Globalization, optimism, possibility, that was the scene. The sun was shining, the streets were waking up. Headlines read about business growth, holidays, and sports. Terrorism was something that made blockbuster movies, a distant headline outside major cities, not something that hit home. People were grabbing coffee, catching trains, walking to work, kids dropping backpacks at school, a world at peace, working, commuting, living. No one expected how quickly that world would shift. The sun had just climbed above the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across Manhattan. The city was alive, but in that familiar, predictable way. Office workers streamed out of subway stations, clutching coffee cups, parents hustled their kids to school, taxi horns echoed in the streets, blending in with the rhythm of footsteps on the pavement. High above, air traffic moved with precision. Air traffic controllers guided flights across the eastern seaboard, their voices calm and measured, part of the invisible choreography that kept the skies safe. In airports, passengers flipped through newspapers, grabbed bagels, and waited for boarding calls. Another ordinary Tuesday. The skyline itself stood tall, iconic and immovable, a symbol of strength. To those below, it just felt like another day. But history was already in motion, carried quietly in the wings of 4 planes now airborne. "8:46 a.m. in New York. A normal Tuesday ends. A commercial jet slams into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, high up between the mid-90s floors. Fire blooms out in a ring. Glass and paper whirl into the sky, and a black column starts to climb over Manhattan. On the ground and on TV, the first instinct is confusion. Terrible accident. A small plane. But the hole is too wide, the fire too fierce, something isn't right. Inside the tower, the impact tears through offices and stairwells. Phones light up. People are trying to breathe, trying to call. trying to understand what just happened. Across the city, sirens begin to converge on Lower Manhattan. And far from New York, in a Florida classroom, the president is told a plane has hit the World Trade Center. Details unclear, the scale unknown. New York looks up, the world looks on, and within minutes, the truth will become undeniable. Inside the North Tower, confusion spread floor by floor. In the lower levels, people felt only a shudder, an elevator jolting, a light flickering, while those above the impact zone faced unimaginable terror. Smoke-filled hallways, stairwells became lifelines, thousands of workers tried to make sense of the chaos, some choosing to descend, others staying put, waiting for instruction. On the streets below, the first sirens began to wail. Firefighters, police officers, paramedics, New York's first responders were already rushing towards Lower Manhattan. They didn't know yet what they were walking into, but instinct drove them forward. At the same time, newsrooms scrambled. Early bulletins on local TV spoke of a small plane striking the tower. Radio announcers tried to confirm details. For millions of people, the story was still confusion, still speculation. But at 9:03 a.m., just 17 minutes after the first impact, the world changed again. As cameras broadcast live from the streets of Manhattan, a second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, appeared in the sky. Viewers watched in real time as it banked sharply and crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. This time, there was no mistaking it. The explosion, the fireball, the screams from the streets below, and a stunned silence of broadcasters on live television. What had seemed to be a tragic accident was now undeniable. America was under attack, and the entire world had just witnessed it. At 9:03 a.m., a second plane struck the South Tower of the World Trade Center. This was the moment of absolute confirmation. The first impact had left room for speculation, a freak accident, an unimaginable error, but now, with the second deliberate strike, there was no doubt. America was under attack. On the streets of Manhattan, thousands watched in shock. Television cameras captured the fireball erupting from the South Tower live, sending that horrific realization into homes across the country and around the world. Inside the North Tower, firefighters were already climbing flight after flight of stairs, hauling heavy gear, determined to reach the upper floors. It was while they were ascending that they began to hear the unthinkable. People leaping from the burning floors above. Survivors in nearby buildings recalled the sound of bodies hitting rooftops, the ground, and even emergency vehicles. Firefighters radioed back about jumpers, their voices tight with emotion, but they pressed on anyway. Meanwhile, in Florida, President George W. Bush sat in a classroom listening to the children read. At 9:05 a.m., White House Chief of Staff Andrew Card approached him, leaned down, and whispered the words, "The second plane has hit the second tower. America is under attack." Bush sat still for a moment, processing the magnitude of what he'd just heard, before continuing to listen quietly, his face frozen in controlled composure. That clip would become one of the most replayed images of the day. Within minutes, FAA and NORAD officials confirmed that at least 4 commercial aircraft had been hijacked. Air traffic controllers watched in horror as flights deviated from their courses, their transponders cut, the silence on radio chilling. At 9:42 a.m., the FAA issued an unprecedented order. All civilian aircraft in US airspace were to land immediately at the nearest airport. For the first time in history, American skies were cleared of all non-military planes. Airlines diverted, emergency landings were made, and airports scrambled to absorb hundreds of unexpected flights. At the same time, the US military raised its alert level. NORAD scrambled fighter jets, but they were already behind the timeline. The realization had set in. America's greatest symbol of economic power was burning, and its skies had been turned into weapons. As Lower Manhattan reeled, another unimaginable report broke. American Airlines Flight 77 had slammed into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m. The nerve center of America's military was now burning. If the Twin Towers symbolized economic power, the Pentagon was the military heart, and it had now been pierced. Inside government and air defense, the question became immediate and terrifying. How many more planes are out there? Controllers and commanders feared additional hijackings, but one thing was confirmed. At least one hijacked airliner was still in the sky, United 93. Back in New York, the nightmare deepened. At 9:59 a.m., less than an hour after impact, the South Tower collapsed in a roaring cascade of steel and dust. A wall of ash and debris swallowed Lower Manhattan. First responders and civilians were now thrown into darkness, choking for air, clawing for light. People ran hand in hand, pulling strangers to their feet, trying to outrun a cloud that seemed to erase the city itself. On the ground, fear turned into a single question. If one tower has fallen, will the other one follow? Crews regrouped, radios crackled through static, and the city fought to stand its ground amid the shock. And overhead, United 93 was still unaccounted for. While chaos unfolded in New York and Washington, one final hijacked aircraft was still in the air. United Airlines Flight 93. The Boeing 757 had taken off late from Newark, bound for San Francisco. By the time it was airborne, the passengers and crew already hearing reports of the earlier attacks. At 9:28 a.m, the plane was hijacked. The terrorists forced the cockpit door, and within minutes, they had control. But unlike the other flights that morning, the passengers of Flight 93 knew what awaited them if they did nothing. Phone calls from on board revealed the grim reality. Planes had been used as weapons. What followed was a decision that echoed through history. Passengers and crew huddled together, whispering prayers, sharing plans, and making final calls to their loved ones. In those last conversations, ordinary men and women became extraordinary. One of them, Todd Beamer, was heard saying two simple words that galvanized the group. Let's roll. Armed with boiling water, makeshift weapons, and sheer courage, they rushed the cockpit. A struggle erupted in midair, the hijackers rocking the plane violently, desperate to throw their attackers off. But the passengers did not stop. In those final moments, their fight forced the terrorists' plan to fail. At 10:03 a.m, United Flight 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. All 40 passengers and crew were killed, but their sacrifice prevented another strike, believed to be aimed at either the US Capitol or the White House. In that field, far from the towering skyscrapers of New York and the Pentagon's walls, the story of Flight 93 became a symbol of defiance, unity, and unimaginable bravery. At 10:28 a.m, the North Tower, the first to be struck but the last to fall, collapsed into the streets of Lower Manhattan. In that moment, a second enormous dust cloud rolled through the city. Survivors who had fled the area now found themselves choking on toxic air filled with asbestos, concrete, glass, dust, and steel. For many, it was only the beginning of a long health battle that would stretch for decades. Meanwhile, fighter jets had already been scrambled across the East Coast, patrolling the skies of New York and Washington, desperate to ensure no other hijacked planes remained. For the first time in history, the FAA ordered all aircraft grounded across the United States. The skies over America fell silent. The collapse of the Twin Towers left families across the country in anguish. Tens of thousands of lives suddenly shattered. Husbands, wives, sons, daughters, colleagues, and friends were gone. Reporters struggled to process the scale of the disaster, speaking in disbelief on live broadcasts around the world. Nations stopped to watch, stunned, as the Twin Towers, once symbols of strength and ambition, lay in ruins. September 11th was over, but the shadow would stretch across the world for generations to come. Thank you to everyone who has watched. I hope I was able to tell the story in a way that was respectful, detailed, and as factual as possible. The world has changed so much since that day, but one thing remains: we will never forget. I'm Matty Egan. See you next time.